Well, good morning, everyone. We have actually three things I'd like to go over today, so I hope that won't be too confusing. Maybe we should start with the most recent event, which is I went to the talk yesterday, after all, with the people from Bilin and Hebron, and frankly, I was thrilled. I was really inspired, and I know, were you there, Amy? Okay, I figured you probably were. I never see you, but you're always there. So I would actually like to say a couple of words about what I found was so good about it, and then call on you, and if it's just a remark or two, just stay where you are, but if you'd like to say more, come on up here, we'll strap the high tech on you, and you can hold forth again. But essentially, it was someone from Hebron, where there is a very small Jewish settler enclave surrounded by a very large Palestinian population. And whenever this happens, you need to secure the settlers. So you have roads that come in that cut the Palestinian habitations apart, and then the roads have to be patrolled, and then the whole thing gets started. The occupation disaster gets started. Now, Hebron is actually, well, first of all, it's a place that's had a lot of emotional meaning for both camps, and that's one of the problems that both the Arabs and the Jews feel that it's part of their heritage. So it's really seriously contested. I think it's very comparable to Kosovo. There were the Albanians who feel that they descended from the original Illyrian people, and they've been there for 2,000 years, and then the Serbs who lost a battle there in the 13th century and have never forgotten it. So Hebron, Palestine in general, but Hebron in particular has that kind of double valence, and it's just been brutally difficult to tease them apart. And there's a lot of international presence in Hebron, which I should tell you the other two things I do want to talk about today. I want to get back to what we heard on Tuesday about Nonviolent Peace Force, third-party nonviolent intervention, say a little bit more about that, because I think it's a big topic for the future of nonviolence. And thirdly and finally, assuming we get through those two things, talk a little bit about restorative justice, which is rather different in the approach that uses. Let's see. Yeah, if you could pass this. This is irrelevant to almost everything else, but if you pass this back to Zoe, Jenna and Zoe should see this cartoon. Okay, and that was a word from our sponsor. Now we're back to our topic. So in Bilin, it's a little bit different because that town is trying to be the second place where the separation wall that's being built roughly, but not exactly, along the green line that's notionally dividing a future state of Palestine from Israel. But the wall actually takes in a lot of Palestinian property, and in some cases cuts farmers off from their livelihood. And that is the case in Bilin. The plan there, if the wall goes as it was planned, it will separate farmers from their olive orchards. And that means, to use the terms of Ted Gore that I've mentioned from time to time, it would be pushing people from poverty to destitution. Okay? So when you're pushed into destitution, you really have nothing to lose anymore. And in a way, it's a similar dynamic to the paradox of repression. In fact, why similar? I would say it's an example of the paradox of repression. If you deliberately push people from poverty, which they can stand for a long time, really, an appallingly long time, into destitution where they can't live, then they respond with resistance of one kind or another. Either they leave the territory or they fight you in some way or another. And as we know, what we're all about here is what way you're going to choose to fight with. And in your reader, you have 2 or 3 articles on Tabasco in Mexico, because that was a classic example. Pemex came into that state, which was basically agricultural and fishing, and polluted the land so badly that it was impossible to make a living anymore. People's children were being born with deformities and dying at an early age because of all of the chemicals, petrochemicals in the water and in the soil. And so they decided to be kind of a buffer between the state of Chiapas, which was below them, and which at that time was responding with the EZLN, with violence. They were going to be in between Chiapas and the federal government with a nonviolent resistance. And it didn't last very long, but it got some things accomplished, and it was really pretty darn good as nonviolence while it lasted. So you have a few articles on that. Now, the building of the separation wall has been an issue where the Palestinians have decided to actually try to obstruct the progress of the wall. And in the town of Budrus, the village of Budrus, they were able to get the wall shifted. And whenever there's a success in a population that's trying to do things nonviolently, that tends to be very exciting, and people pick up on it, and it can spread. And so this is what the people in Bilin are trying to do. And I'm really sorry now that I've heard from them. I'm sorry they weren't able to come to this class with their pictures and whatnot, but we'll do the best they can. How to begin? I think a lot of Palestinians feel, they have learned from experience, that nonviolent resistance is not going to get them anywhere. So this is a pretty good way to start nonviolent resistance. What did I say? Did I say violent resistance is not going to get them anywhere? That's what I meant to say. Yeah. If that were true, we would just shut down the cameras, leave the whole thing. No, totally wrong. Violent resistance is not going to get them anywhere. And they tried pretty widespread nonviolent resistance in the first Intifada in 87 to 89, which you saw a little bit about in the film Where There Is Hatred. And we didn't really get to talk about it very much, but I think the drive of that nonviolent resistance, Intifada 1, resulted in the Madrid peace accords. And at that point, unfortunately, the resistors felt, okay, we've done our job, so we can go back to same old. And who can blame them? When existence is hanging by a thread anyway, you barely have enough to eat, to take off from work and go and be nonviolent for a long time is very, very difficult. Which is why, as David Hartsough was telling us on Tuesday, we pay field team workers in nonviolent peace force. So anyway, that was a case of nonviolence that was working, but in the end, when the nonviolent resistors were able to sort of shift the momentum up to the decision makers, okay, we fixed it on the ground, now you do the changes, it failed. And this is an interesting kind of dynamic to consider. When Martin Luther King did this repeatedly, I would say it was more successful. One iconic episode for me is when he asked President Lyndon Johnson for a Voters' Rights Act, and Johnson said, that's impossible, I haven't got the support for that. In Congress, we would lose everything. He said, okay, I know what to do. Went out and had one more year of demonstrations and organizing and resistance in the streets, and then he came back, and Johnson signed the Voters' Rights Act and handed Martin Luther King Jr. the pen and sang, this is Johnson singing, I don't know how good he was, sang, "We Shall Overcome." And many of his coworkers said they had never seen Martin Luther King Jr. cry until that moment. That was an example of getting the dynamic to work. The change has to start from the grassroots, but you force the power holders, the official power holders, their kind of power, to respond And okay, finito la musica, story's over, it was a success. But in at least two big cases that I can think of, people on the ground did their work, handed it over to the power holders or the official power holders, and they blew it. And one was the first Intifada, where the international community could not get an agreement together that would actually work. And the other was this Prague Spring uprising of 1968, where the Czechs and their leadership were very much on the same page, very much together, and it was them against the Warsaw Pact armies. They were using police cars to deliver contraband newspapers. It was working very well. But then the Soviets invited, quote unquote, about 9 people from the Czech leadership to Moscow for talks, quote unquote. I'm glad I was not a fly on the wall when those talks were going on. It must have been really brutal jawboning. And they got the leadership basically, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, got them to betray the revolution. And they knew that they had done that. They went back and had to announce this to the people. They were crying. It was a disaster. Well, at that point, what could have happened, I guess that's the word I want to use. What could have happened is the people could have said, okay, back to the streets. You know, how much more do you want? We've done it for 9 months. We'll give you another 9 months till we get. When the people lead, the leaders will follow. But the leaders weren't following, so you have to go back and do it some more. Obviously, you can get exhausted doing stuff like this. You don't want to risk your life. Some people were hurt. Some people were killed. Everything was disrupted. It can be exhausting. But I think that really at the bottom of it, what makes these dynamics fail is we still can't get over the idea that we're in charge. We still think that the President of the United States is the chief executive, and he will do everything in his power to get you to keep on thinking that. You know, he'll say, I'm the decider, and everybody goes back to work. Oh, thank God, we've got a decider up there making wrong decisions on our behalf. So it really is part of, I'm seeing again that it's part of this very big paradigm shift to get people to realize that the human individual is where all of this is coming from, and human individuals create structures, and they can dissipate those structures overnight. You know, one day, once when I was getting kind of depressed, and I thought we weren't going to be able to pull off the revolution, I'm glad I didn't realize that I was right at that time. I didn't realize how long it would take. I remember talking to a socialist friend of mine. It was unusual to have an actual, honest-to-gosh, red-blooded socialist. Hal Draper was one. And I was saying to him, it's such an enormous, monolithic thing. How are we going to get anywhere? And he said, look, up until one day, Joseph Stalin was God, and the next day he didn't even exist. Because people decided that he was a non-person, all the statues were pulled down, all the textbooks were erased, and he just wasn't there anymore. So we have to have the faith that it's us and our decisions that we renew every day that are really building the world, and the rest of it are just agreements that are made and that can be broken. Okay, I was going to say some unpatriotic things. I think I better stop here. So the first Intifada, as I say, was really a success. It was going along pretty well. I think we may even want to put Kosovo in this category, that in 1991, it actually had forced the Serbs to reopen the University of Pristina and allow people to teach in Albanian. And it's remarkable how often that is the issue in these identity struggles, getting to have instruction in your own language. I would say second to water rights. It's the most important issue today. But the people didn't really quite appreciate that they had succeeded. And so at a famous funeral celebration in Drenica, somebody showed up with a mask and a rifle and said, we're the KLA, and this is how it has to go. And the nonviolence more or less collapsed, and the energy drained off into the KLA. The next thing you knew, you had 78 days of NATO bombing to get the Serbs off their back. So it's a kind of balance, isn't it, where on the one hand, you have to acknowledge that you had a success. On the other hand, very important, not to try to own that success personally, not to say I did it, and above all, not to be, I'm going to coin a word here, it's not a very pretty one, so we don't have to end up continuing to use it, but not to be triumphalistic about it. Like when you win a 100 yards dash, you're supposed to spray champagne over everybody, which is a very pagan, sacrificial holdover. I don't think they realize that. There's real superstition. But you know, you're supposed to dance around, even if you get 10 yards, there's a special dance you're supposed to do to show that you triumphed. And it's extremely important. Martin Luther King was superb on this point. It's extremely important for nonviolent practitioners not to do that. Let me give you a really good example of how you should do it. And this will concern the Sicilian Gandhi, as he's sometimes called, Danilo Dolci, who was General Secretary of the Warrior Sisters League for some years, Warrior Sisters League being a very committed pacifist, nonviolent organization. It's a nonviolent organization that focuses on war rather than a pacifist organization, which focuses exclusively on war. Maybe it's a fine distinction. It's not going to come up on the midterm. But Danilo Dolci was the General Secretary internationally of the Warrior Sisters League, and he was a wealthy architect, or he was an architect, so he was going to become wealthy. And he went down to Sicily one summer for vacation and was so struck by the poverty there that it changed his whole life, and he dedicated his life to the uplift of these Siciliani, the Sicilian peasants. And one of his first campaigns was to get a dam built at a town called Giotto. And he really has some struggles to go through because on the one hand, the government didn't want to build that dam, and on the other hand, the mafia didn't want that dam to be built. So throughout his career, he's treading this fine line between the mafiosi on the one hand and the government on the other hand. Mafia-government connections usually end up doing a lot of damage. Anyway, not to start singing Woody Guthrie songs and go into all of that, I'm just trying to stay on topic here. After much struggle, particularly against the mafia, he got the dam built, which meant that he now had a lot of water in his possession, and water in Sicily is a valuable commodity. I mean, it's a valuable commodity anywhere where it's rare. Fresh water was rare enough in Sicily that this was a huge thing. And now this whole time he's starting schools, and he's having children can come to the school, and it does not matter what families they come from. They can be mafiosi or non-mafiosi. He's not asking that question. So there's already a bit of a bridge that he's building with the mafia. And on one famous occasion, a mafioso came to him and said, Ecco, Danilo. Said, okay, Danilo, you've won. Now you get all the water. And Danilo said, no, you don't understand. This water is for us. This water is for everybody. Nobody has lost. We just now have done something efficient that's good for Sicily. So that's an excellent example of not being, pardon my neologism. That'd be a good television program, actually. Pardon my neologism. But anyway, pardon my using the word triumphalistic. It was a good example of not doing it. So when you have a nonviolent success, you want to come out in between those two extremes. You don't want to say, you don't want to fail to appreciate your achievement, because that's what's going to give you the energy and the learning capacity to go on to the next go-round. But at the same time, you don't want to gloat and be triumphalistic about it. Okay, so this then by way of a long-winded bit of background, I hope you found it amusing. Here's the success in Budrus. In the remote background, there is some acknowledgement of a success in Bilin. And once again, there are learning institutions which are in business to collect this information and propagate it. And one of them is Holy Land Trust in Bethlehem. And the director of Holy Land Trust is a fellow named Sami Awad. His uncle Mubarak has come and spoken to this class many times, so I just scheduling couldn't make it to work this semester. But I asked Mohammed Khatib if he knew Sami Awad. He definitely did. So you have these two kinds of learning going on. There's experiential learning and sort of a folk process where, there is a mysterious kind of learning process in living systems. Okay? One more digression, we'll be right back on track. In the Rhone Valley, there was a drought, and it lasted for such a long time that 5 generations of beavers were not able to build their dams. Okay? By the time the 6th generation of beavers came along, there was a good rainfall, the water level rose, and immediately those beavers started building dams. Now, how in Tarnation did they know how to do that? Their great-great-great-great-grandbeavers were the last ones who knew. And to our knowledge, there's no written language in the beaver community. It's quite mysterious. So what I'm saying is this process goes on among humans also, not the dam building part, the transmitting of knowledge from one generation to the next. And it will take place, and we don't need to worry about it, except that for our purposes, in terms of bringing about a nonviolent revolution and a paradigm shift, it's way too slow. Way too slow. So we need institutions that capture that knowledge and codify it and systematize it and propagate it and make it happen more quickly. There used to be such institutions. They were called universities. Now they take large amounts of money from corporations. Okay, so the people in Bilin, here they are. They know that there is such a thing as nonviolence. They know that it can be made to work. As Mohammed pointed out last night, their cause is just. They have tremendous advantage in that regard. Their cause is completely just. The Israelis are not only violating international law, they're violating their own laws. That's very well pointed out. So it was ripe for civil disobedience. This is classic civil disobedience. You have a law that's not lawful, and you correct it to bring people back to the law. That's really civil. So I just want to mention one other thing that really struck me, and then I'd like to call on the rest of you who were there to fill this in. The thing that struck me maybe most of all was his final announcement. He had shown this very stirring film, this PowerPoint. I was impressed, by the way, he got his laptop to work. That was pretty impressive, more than I could do. He had this very impressive display and presentation, and he gave his talk. He answered questions. One of those questions was very impressive, the way he handled that. I'll leave that up to you people. But when it was all over and he had his second standing ovation, he said, there's going to be a conference in Bilin, April 19th through 21st, something like that. And I just want to add, as you may have noticed, I do not take attendance in this class. A word to the wise. Anyway, he said there's going to be this conference, and he wants you to come. And he echoed words that I had heard from Mubarak Awad 20 years earlier in Santa Cruz, that Mubarak had said, we are willing to die, but we do not want to die alone. He said, do please come. And then he said something that really struck me. He said, don't be for us, don't be against us, just come and learn. Make your own decision. You see, that is really core PNV, the principle of nonviolence. Because remember Gandhi saying, if a man or woman truly believes in something, for that person, that thing is right and proper. I mean, the point is always to act on your beliefs and test them, and sometimes it's the role of the nonviolent actor to help you to do that even when you disagree with him. Remember the famous example of Gandhi coming out of a meeting, and there were these black flag people, they wanted to beat him. It wouldn't take much. He only weighs about 104 pounds. It's neither teeth nor hair, the two ways that mammals often defend themselves. And so they're getting ready to hit him, and he says, what good is it going to do you to bang on his head? And they said, yeah, maybe this isn't exactly the best thing to do. And then they said, so what should we do? And then he gave them a whole nonviolent strategy of how they should carry out satyagraha against him. And they kept saying, well, then what if that doesn't work? What should we do next? And finally he said, you should go on a fast unto death against me. They said, we're not prepared to do that. He said, that's not my job. You're just trying to tell them how to do it. So that's a humorous, but also very real example that he was not trying to recruit people to be on his side. He was just trying to push the truth along. And that's tremendous. Of course, nobody with more than a 52 IQ seeing what's going on the ground there would fail to realize that this is a very unequal, very imbalanced victim-victimizer situation. Now, you may remember that when David Hartsough was here on Tuesday, he briefly mentioned the term nonpartisanship. It's a serious issue in TPNI. I'm not even totally sure he did mention that word. We have to go back to the webcast, but I think he used the term. Now, it's taken us, I use the first person plural because this has been a project that I've been working on really for decades. It's taken us really a long time to get this concept clear. I think it's pretty clear really throughout the whole community now. People know what they mean by nonpartisanship. The problem was, how are you going to go, let's take a village in Nicaragua, because I have connections with that country now. Let's say you go into a village in Nicaragua and these Contras are coming across the border from Honduras and coming into the village in the middle of the night, rounding people up, shooting men, women, and children. How are you going to be in that situation without feeling that what you're supposed to do is protect